Hello, and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be doing my 14.16 mid lane tier list, so if you have content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes towards the mid lane this patch. We saw a direct buff towards Katarina, Orianna, Azir, Syndra, and Sylas. We saw a nerf towards some of the competitive AD mid laners, Lucian and Corki, as they were the two most performant in the previous patch. And then there were some other adjustments. Doran's Blade, obviously being nerfed, has been a huge hit to a lot of the mid lane pool. But let's cover the changes. So the D tier going to stay relatively similar with the inclusion of another champion. That is Varus, that is Lucian, that is Caitlyn, Ezreal, and Tristana. So all of these champions, obviously, either within some manner of way have been nerfed through the system, the item system, the rune system. They have been directly nerfed. They've been adjusted in ways to kind of push them outside of mid lane. All these changes in the end have kind of left these champions in a pretty rough spot for the mid lane tier list. I'll cover each one individually. In Zeri's case, she was my C tier ADC option alongside Kai'Sa and Smolder, who are going to persist there. Kai'Sa's pretty close to dropping down, but Zeri still arguably one of the more performant and competitive. The average player though, something I'd recommend avoiding now that Doran's Blade has been nerfed and that has taken a bit of power away from her. Tristana is in a horrible spot at the moment for mid lane. They've really taken big swings at her to try and push her outside of competitive. Caitlyn never really picked up in the first place. Same kind of goes for Varus. We did see a slight bit, but then that died down pretty quickly when they nerfed his lethality build and changed him slightly. In Lucian's case, they directly nerfed him for mid lane this patch, buffed up his passive so he maintains a fairly similar win rate and consistency in the bot lane. Arguably even slightly better, the passive buffs were quite nice, so definitely did help him there. In Ezreal's case, he was definitely doing quite well in competitive as well. Wasn't finding kind of like Caitlyn wasn't finding the same level of traction in mid and low elo, which is obviously what these tier lists are targeted towards. And then Corki is arguably the worst of them all now. He was an incredibly early game skewed champion, which is where a lot of his power came in competitive. They tend to very much value and favor early game skewed champions, and just in Elite, same kind of similarity, where if you can get advantages through lane phase and then convert it into some level of power later on, whether that's through being a ranged champion in this case, and that can definitely have a lot of value. But Corki got nerfed by the Doran's Blade changes, also lost 30 health, 40 health, I can't remember specifically, in the previous patch, and he now finds himself a spot within the D tier. Obviously, this patch he did have the Q changes where they tagged that ability slightly on the mana cost, trying to push his wave clear down a bit, as that was kind of where some of his power was continuing to persist in competitive. The other champion in the D tier is Azir. He got buffed this patch. Not quite enough though, he still underperforms for the average player, but that's going to be where he stays for as long as he's in his current state. He is an incredibly hard to pilot champion, and obviously if you give him resources he can still thrive, but you need to be finding these advantages, and oftentimes he's not able to really propel himself that well in the early game, and yeah, the difficulty of piloting the pick can definitely feel quite overwhelming for a lot of people. I believe that is my entire D tier. Moving on to the C tier then. So Kai'Sa and Smolder sit at the back end of the C tier. Both these champions to a degree were tagged by the Doran's Blade changes, losing flat HP, very, very big for marksmen for the most part, as it hurts their ability to resist some of the other either harass lanes or all-in potential, which some of the assassins obviously have. In Smolder's case, I know some people like going Doran's Ring, and that can be definitely something you lean into a bit more if you're playing more of this caster and sit-back style. In Kai'Sa's case, you can obviously opt into like Cohen situations, but she was primarily going with Doran's Blade, so that does hurt her a bit. Kassadin, also down in my C tier at the moment. This champion's been in a pretty rough spot for a while now. Obviously, they tagged him pretty heavily going into this split, and he's just not really found his footing since. Obviously, he still scales quite aggressively, and if you can get to those late game points, then you can definitely feel rewarded for it. But there are arguably considerably more consistent and better win cons, which other champions have at the moment. So I kind of recommend those options, but Kassadin can still scale up and still be useful later on into the game. Kiana stays within my C tier, did get tagged by the Doran's Blade changes, can opt into D shield if she does need to. Could also do triple port or or rejuve, the other pot, green pot, refill pot, with longsword, which can definitely be something she opts into if she needs that additional sustain within lane. Of course, she got changed this patch. She lost a bit of power, or a substantial amount of power on her ultimate and her W. She gained back some of that power through the Q, making it so she can look for more harass angles and like more consistent trading, but then losing a bit of that all-in potential if you're just going in with ultimate. It's left her in a pretty neutral spot, arguably, if anything, a bit less powerful, but then that's because of the play pattern shift, so she'll probably gain back some of that, but for the moment she stays within my C tier. Also a champion which is incredibly elite skewed. Obviously, if you put a lot of games into Kiana, you'll very much be rewarded for it. Ryze stays within my C tier. I think this champion's, I say this every time, more for top lane though, like a relatively underrated pick. Within mid lane, he is a bit weaker at the moment. He is being buffed in 14.17, which is good to see, as this champion could do with a bit of love to kind of push him back into a spot where maybe he sees some level of competitive and gets more picked up more frequently by the average player. Zoe, I've seen more people talk and just about Zoe and like the surrounding kind of environment for her at the moment, and how she kind of like dominates in China, and that's where a lot of her pick rate, ban rate, and just overall presence lies at the moment. Within the West, obviously doesn't find that same level of consistency. Her damage, or her burst damage, is very high, and I know August has spoken about possibly shifting the power back into being able to get some CD on these bubbles, like CD refund on the bubbles, as an enabler to maybe see a bit more play, but we'll have to see whether that change actually comes to something, or whether she kind of stays in the same spot at the moment. But I'm going to leave her in the C tier. She can be harder to pilot than some of the other champions, and obviously a very aggressive gold scaler within the mid lane, relying on snowballing. Orianna got a buff this patch. She received 5% AP ratio on the Q. It definitely did help her. She gained a bit of power from it. Not really enough to push her outside of my C tier, but her play rate and ban rate obviously have picked up a bit, as it was her core ability which did get buffed. So there's definitely some level of movement there. And in patches to come, with like more nerfs towards some of these AD mid laners, when nothing fleet, cut down, and absorb life next patch, I could definitely see Orianna rising up into the B tier. She's definitely a high C tier option at the moment. Moving down from the B tier though, we have Jace. So Jace, not really finding the same level of performance as he had in some of the previous patches. Actually got hit by the Doran spray changes a bit harder than a lot of these other champions. He's reliant on like shifting forms, being like able to go range to melee, and that can definitely hurt losing a bit more HP. It makes his all-ins a little less threatening. It makes his ability to like resist also a bit less threatening. He's relatively weak. Well, I mean, not weak, but not as powerful as he has been in the past and in his early game. He can definitely be pushed out of lane. He's lower base health than I believe he's ever had at the moment. So he can definitely struggle into some of these more harass-based AP matchups, or all-in threat of an assassin. And yeah, he's definitely struggling a bit more at the moment, so I'm dropping him down from the B tier to the C tier. Moving up out of the C tier is Katarina. She is doing really well this patch. From early data, or not early data, this is like mid-patch data at this point. We've seen like Electrocute, we've seen Summon Airy with Leandry, which doesn't seem to have the same level of performance as the Electrocute Lichbane variation at the moment. We also see some of the AD builds still have a bit of success, like Bork into Kraken on that Kraken spike still looks to be very strong at the moment, so that could be definitely something they're targeting with the nerf she is going to receive in 14.17, but they might also like target some level of her AP build. Obviously she's going to be a bit easier to pilot now, with the Qmax build being the way you play her, as it's a point and click ability obviously, but she's still a high skill champion. There's no taking away from that. If you struggle piloting this pick, I'd recommend avoiding it, but if you feel confident and you were someone previously waiting for Katarina buffs to like go back to the champion, yeah, she's in a pretty good spot at the moment. Definitely something I would recommend for primarily like Katarina mains and like people who are consistently good at the champion. Wouldn't really recommend like learning it though. With nerfs coming in next patch, she might take a bit of a hit, and it would kind of be wasted time if anything. Other champions within my B tier are going to be Akali. So Akali, not doing as well at the moment with some of the nerfs / adjustments she's received. The E nerf was like a lot of her power budget, so she definitely lost quite a bit there. She dropped quite a large amount and like sits towards the bottom of my B tier. The R changes were fairly neutral, but she did lose, I believe, a small amount of power there. Not having as much R uptime can be quite frustrating. And yeah, she now sits towards the low end of my B tier. Malphite also in this area. I mean, obviously this champion is great into AD compositions. As I say all the time, Tank Malphite can really solidly sit like towards the A tier. AP Malphite tends to be more of a C tier gimmicky kind of pick. If you can snowball, then obviously it can definitely have a lot of value, but you don't have that same level of durability. You're quite squishy. If the targets have some level of reaction to your ultimate, then it can definitely feel quite punishing. But if you utilize AP Malphite as like more of a counter pick alongside Tank Malphite in situations, then yeah, this pick can definitely have a bit more value, but he sits in my B tier for the moment. Zed and Cho'Gath also here. Cho'Gath actually sits more towards the high end of my B tier. Champion's been buffed to the point where it's actually in a relatively decent spot at the moment, but almost stat sticky in a way. The E has been buffed a large amount. The Q has an absurdly high base damage, rightfully so, though it is a very telegraphed and slow ability. Also forces him to stand still and cast it, which can be quite like a really solid punish angle. So yeah, he sits more towards the high end of my B tier, but he definitely still has his drawbacks at the moment. Zed. The buffs did help him. Obviously, he's now a lot stronger within laning phase. The R cooldown later on, though, does hurt him a bit. But yeah, that oppressive laning phase can really be felt quite a bit now. The Q damage really does a huge amount of chunking. And if you're able to consistently land and rotate abilities, and you're like consistent with the champion, then yeah, he can be really rewarding to play at the moment. I'd recommend avoiding him if obviously you don't put the games into Zed. He is also a relatively hard to pilot mid laner. But yeah, he's in a pretty good spot at the moment compared to where he's been for like the last season and a bit, where they've intentionally kept him weak because of his absurdly high ban rates. Hui, also with my B tier. Hui is a good champion. Like, I think that is just how I would describe Hui. But obviously he has like a fairly unique kit. 9 abilities combined with the ultimate gives him a lot of different potential on what he can output. Large amounts of AoE, single target damage. He definitely has a lot of that value in his kit. He also has relatively good rotation with some of his with his movement speed ability. His CC can be quite oppressive to play against, with how low it can really come down to on cooldown. But yeah, definitely has his drawbacks, though. He doesn't do quite the same level of damage as like a burst marksman. He doesn't have the range of an artillery marksman, but he definitely does have range. Obviously, that QW has very large amounts of range, but it can be reacted to, so it's not as not going to be as consistent, obviously. But and yeah, no mobility can also feel quite punishing of his champion, and that is where a lot of his drawbacks do lie. Arguably, the main reason why he sits in my B tier is just because I believe he's a bit harder to pilot than some of my A tier options. But he does have a lot of tools within his kit, which can definitely give him a lot of value. Blackfire Torch can be quite a nice item, Horizon Focus, and yeah, I'm going to leave him within the kind of like mid to high section of my B tier for the moment. Ziggs, also with my B tier, he's solid artillery champion. They do want to do some work on him at some point, but he does have options in the build with like your Blackfires, your Luden's Companions, is it Luden's Companion? Yeah, I think it's called Luden's Companion at the moment. We've gone through different iterations of this item. Yeah, he's in a relatively decent spot. I'd argue he doesn't have the same level of damage output as something like a Vel'Koz, which is why I have Vel'Koz in my higher tier. And then, arguably, I'd say a tier up from Vel'Koz at the moment is Xerath, who does have a huge amount of damage accessible to him. And then, arguably, a bit more range. Well, I mean, actually, not even arguably, does just have more range than something like a Vel'Koz. But yeah, these three champions can be like almost like subs in and out for each other, but I do think Ziggs can be a bit harder to play in situations. His Q is not as consistently landable as some of the other tools which some of the other tools which the other ones have access to. But yeah, he's a solid mid-tier B pick for me at the moment. Talon also going to be with my B tier. This champion's received a bunch of quality of life changes. He did get hit by the Doran's Blade changes, which does take him down a bit, but he kind of stays within the middle of my B tier at the moment. If you can pilot the pick well, you can definitely feel quite rewarding. Of course, with the changes for quality of life stuff, the burst he does have early game with like Ignite, and the death timer changes all do help him quite a bit, so he sits as like a high B tier option at the moment. Vladimir is decent at the moment. Obviously, the Rabadon's Rush is definitely being more heavily implemented into this champion. It does have options in like Protobot if you do want access to a bit more mobility, but his burst potential on that Rabadon spike is incredibly aggressive. He definitely does scale quite nicely if you're able to get these items up there, like when you want the spikes primarily and ahead of the enemy team. Then yeah, this champion can feel quite oppressive to play against, especially if your pool is a good answer to the enemy abilities. But he sits within my B tier for the moment. I do think there are other options which not only are maybe easier to play, or have like more upfront burst damage. Vladimir is a bit more reliant on like a level of chunking and then all-in potential, whereas some of these other options can kind of just look for those angles right away rather than having to do a level of preparation. Twisted Fate, definitely falling off at the moment. This champion is sort of struggling substantially compared to where he started out last split and this split, I believe. He only more recently got nerfed, but that was primarily AD builds. The AP ratios have, of course, been nerfed. The blue card had a really aggressive AP ratio, and that's been tagged down a bit at this point. The champion, yeah, is struggling a bit more compared to where he used to be. He doesn't really have the same level of utility builds. He's a bit more bound to just like an AP burst build at the moment. Whether they'll revisit Twisted Fate at some point, it would be interesting to see, but obviously top lane Twisted Fate has definitely indirectly hurt mid lane Twisted Fate quite a bit, and he now sits as like a low B tier option. Ari sits as like a mid B tier option. This champion, a lot of people didn't even realize Ari got nerfed, which was quite interesting. Like, Ari took a big hit with the ult CD and the W damage nerf, as it hurts her ability to CS, it hurts her level of harass and her trading, it hurts her ability to, with the ult nerf, it hurts her mobility and her consistent all-in windows, which can, yeah, definitely do quite a bit to a champion like Ari. She went from being like a high A tier at the time to like a mid B tier option. Obviously, AP items were kind of relatively weak compared to the marksman items, which she was also struggling from at the time. Not so much anymore, so she definitely does kind of like rise up as like a mid B tier option. But yeah, the Lich Bane nerfs did also hurt her quite a bit, as she was rushing that item primarily at one point, and obviously Malignance was like her core item as well, which I believe she still does go quite consistently, as she does really value that ultimate haste to enable her to look for those angles and be a bit more mobile on the map. Talia and Fizz are the other two. Well, actually, there's a couple more champions here. I've got Talia, Fizz, Akshan. So these three champions, all kind of like arguably relatively similar in that they at one point were like really benefiting from the item system. Akshan from those marksman items. Talia really benefiting from like Blackfire Torch and Luden's Companion in the mid lane. But all three of them either received adjustments or nerfs because of their items, and then their items ended up getting nerfed as well as them, so kind of like a Riot special. Fizz's case, it was like the Storm Surge combined with Lich Bane combo. Both those items pretty heavily tagged down compared to where they used to be. Fizz does benefit from the Storm Surge buffs the other patch, like I believe last patch, which does push him back up to like a high B tier option. But yeah, Talia definitely struggling a bit more, but still like a high B tier pick. Akshan arguably like a mid to low B tier pick. This champion is incredibly well, it is elite skewed, but it is also very solo queue skewed. I wouldn't ever really see competitive, even if it was very strong, like a 54% win rate I think he had in elite or something, and zero competitive play, even though we were in an AD mid centric meta. Yeah, this champion definitely struggling a lot more indirectly because of a lot of the marksman changes. Kraken Slayer being nerfed, Bork being nerfed, Fleet being nerfed, Absorb Life being adjusted. All these things have definitely had a knock-on effect, and yeah, Akshan now sits towards the lower end of my B tier. Lissandra, also within my B tier, she is a great answer to a lot of the assassin picks, but not really finding the level of consistency she like would want for like more generalistic matchups. If you want something more consistent generally, then I would argue something like Vex is a bit better at the moment, but Lissandra can still perfectly be played in like a lot of matchups and still find success, just not as consistent as something like a Vex I would who I'd recommend over, mainly because she has a bit more range, a bit more snowball potential, and arguably a bit more agency for those reasons. The other two champions dropping down are Aurelia and Yasuo. So Yasuo and I mean actually both of them affected by Bork nerfs, which is why they're now being dropped down to my B tier. The Borknaths hurt Yasuo's ability to get the Q threshold as early. Obviously, the 5% loss, 5% attack speed loss on Zerkers did also take a bit of a tag there for him. In Aurelia's case, she just loses a bit of damage and a bit of attack speed. It doesn't affect her as much in top lane, as they obviously have a higher health pools where the bonus 1% current health damage comes in and can be quite nice for her. But within the mid lane, yeah, definitely took a bit of a tag there. Drops from the A tier to the B tier. Yone drops from S tier to my A tier. So Yone really was really thriving from Bork quite heavily, and obviously does take a bit of a hit, so he does drop from S to A now. Still very good champion though. If you can snowball, find those angles with the ultimate, like fish for picks, obviously with your EQ combo, he can still be incredibly oppressive within the mid lane. Is still a great AD option, arguably still one of the best core AD mid lane picks, especially if you go up into the higher ranks and into elite. For the average player though, he does drop down a bit, sits towards the lower end of the A tier. Now, moving on to the other picks here. So Zac, I'm adding as like a high A tier option. Someone recommended, someone recommended it in the last video, but they wanted to see where Zac would kind of place amongst these picks. And I believe he's a high A tier option. He's just unpopular. Obviously, we've seen Zac in the past be a pretty solid mid laner. He's not too far away from where he used to be. Obviously, he's still a great top laner, and oftentimes mid lane will mirror that to a degree. D-Shield's still a great item for him. Second Wind can give him the durability and the sustain he really needs to kind of make it through a lot of the mage options. He really spikes mid game, obviously, but that's where a lot of Zac's power lies, and then can kind of fall off later on into the game. But yeah, as like a mid game spiker, solid tank with a decent level of damage, yeah, he's a pretty high A tier pick for me. Morgana sits at the low end of the A tier. She's a very low elo skewed pick, obviously requires a bit of setup to really make this champion function. I personally don't like Morgana that much. There is a lot of ways of playing on the champion, but there's no denying that she's definitely benefiting from some of the W buffs she received, combined with Blackfire Torch being a good item for her at the moment. Renekton, underrated mid lane pick, with Yasuo and Yone being number 1 and number 2 most played top laners. Renekton is a great answer to them, and thus he sits within my A tier for the moment. I wouldn't really recommend playing him outside of these matchups, albeit there are still other things you can definitely play him into. But he definitely thrives as like a solid A tier pick at the moment. Syndra moves up from the B tier into the A tier. The R buff was quite nice for her. It now allows her to find more consistent kill angles or kill targets which you might not want of with your ultimate, and that definitely does help her to a degree. And yeah, she rises up to the A tier now. LeBlanc sits at the high end of my A tier. Obviously, arguably the most, the strongest AP mid laner in Elite at the moment. I know some other people would look at things like, actually, what other people? LeBlanc is probably just considered the best AP mid laner at the moment in Elite. For the average player, though, I'm going to leave her as in the A tier. I was thinking like of other champions, but like no, she probably is just considered the strongest there. And yeah, I agree with that. She is incredibly oppressive with her head. Her wave clear has definitely been helped quite a bit with the W buffs combined with the Q farming buffs, and overall, yeah, definitely helped her a lot for the general player and a lot within Elite, where she is definitely performing the strongest. But for the moment, I'm going to leave her within the A tier, even though she's arguably quite hard to pilot, but she is getting nerfed in 14.17, rightfully so, obviously performing too well in Elite at the moment. Nasus, underrated mid lane pick. I definitely think this champion is in a very good spot at the moment. He can oftentimes just resist a lot of the mid lane picks, or opt into certain things which can like allow him to resist, whether that's like 3 points E, just full on E max, 1 point E, and then you can opt into some level of other durability options, whether that's like your sustain keystones, whether that's like your grasp, your fleet. With the AP variations, you're playing like Summon Airy, Phase Rush, you can play Spellbook, you can play Comet, all these can work quite nicely on him, and then yeah, you can start like Tear, you can start Doran's Ring, you can start D-Shield. There's loads of ways you can play this champion. It can really help him within the mid lane at the moment. He's obviously pretty one-dimensional as just a champion, but that's where, yeah, a lot of the rune knowledge combined with what items you really need within the game can come in and definitely like rise him up throughout the tiers. Also sits as like a very high A tier option. Yeah, these 3 picks definitely higher on my A tier at the moment. Nico is going to be low down on my A tier. She didn't benefit from the Storm Surge and Protobot buffs as much as I hoped she would, but she did obviously benefit from them, so she did move up from the B tier to the A tier. She's a pretty solid pick, but yeah, still relatively unpopular, so she sits towards the low end of my A tier at the moment. Vex, I've spoken about her, but she's still a great answer to high mobility mid laners, with obviously Yon Yasuo being 1-2. Same goes for the other champion, Renekton, which I spoke about. She is also very much thriving off that. In 2 other matchups, she's going to be a bit weaker, but she still has good range. She still has good burst potential. It's where she kind of has have the edge over something like a Lissandra at the moment, in my opinion. And yeah, I would have her as like a low A tier, mid A tier option. In counterpick situations, she's like a solid S plus, arguably. And she has seen a game in competitive. I believe Mad Lions brought it out against G2. Pantheon also benefits from Yasuo and Yone being popular. A lot of these champions really do thrive from them because they have great tools within their kit to shut them down. Either that's point and click CC or anti-mobility tools. Poppy would be someone else who really benefits from, but Poppy mid doesn't really exist, so you can't really add that here. But yeah, Pantheon also benefiting from them. It's in generalistically a pretty good spot though at the moment. You have like Conqueror and PTA as good keystone options. You can opt into multiple secondary trees, whether that's like your Resolve tree, sorcery tree, domination tree if you're looking to really heavily snowball. I prefer sorcery tree for the benefit of getting mana flow and scorch and really harassing the opponent down with Q, and then utilizing that to look for kill windows. That can feel quite nice, but I do think conditioning and second wind are great options of resolve alongside overgrowth, which is like a guaranteed take now that you have 2 health ratios within his kit, 2 health ratios within your kit, which can really help that. Moving on from Pantheon, we have Diana and Echo next to each other in the jungle, next to each other in the mid lane. Both really strong early game mid laners. Obviously, Echo scales a bit better than Diana, but can opt into like your Halo Blades with Scorch E-Start, which can like give him a really oppressive level 1. Diana's case, she has incredibly large amounts of harass with her Q. She can really consistently look for all-in windows. She's a really strong laner. Does fall off incredibly aggressively though later on into the game, which is where like she kind of falters as being like a very high tier mid laner at the moment. Victor, underrated. I think this champion is probably one of my most underrated picks at the moment. He's oftentimes the conception with like why Victor's bad is the fact that he's slow to get like his stacks, and it can feel quite bad in the current state of him. But he still has good ratios, and he can still siege quite well. He still can be oppressive and do a lot of damage if you're able to get those items online. And I think people really do sleep on this champion at the moment. Obviously, he's not as good as some of my S2 options, and he does falter a bit more in Elite, where you are more likely to get punished for having a bit weaker of an early. But yeah, this champion is kind of slept on at the moment. Definitely a solid A tier pick. Swain, high A tier pick. Swain, obviously great into low range comps where you can utilize your ultimate, your short range E, your Q damage. He's primarily just played in most situations. You can't really play him into range that much, whether that's through their kiting power or just someone having the burst like at range to kind of shut you down, whether it's like a Caitlyn or something. It can really depend. But he's a bit easier to play in low elo, as people are more likely to like walk into your E's and not so much dodge your relatively telegraphed kit. So you can definitely benefit from mid and low elo a lot more, and he kind of sits as like a high A tier option for those reasons. Vel'Koz, also, I mean, I've already spoken about Vel'Koz, but I still think this champion's a great artillery option. Obviously, he has great upfront damage with his, he has great damage once you proc his passive, combined with the ultimate. It gives him really good burst windows. I'd argue the place where he falters the most is like those mid to late game situations where you're not ahead of the curve, and your damage or your positioning can be out of place and you can get punished for it. But I think this champion's pretty good now ever since he got buffed. I think his champion's definitely been benefiting from those. That was like a 5% AP ratio on the passive, combined with just some upfront flat damage. Yeah, definitely helped him, and he is a pretty solid A tier champion in my opinion. Vel'Koz, not Vel'Koz, but my brain is like not working anymore. Aurora. So Aurora's an interesting one. Got buffed, got nerfed, got buffed back to being a pretty solid mid lane option. They want to skew her more for mid lane. They have now specifically specified it. In 14.17, she's being nerfed, obviously, as like more people play the champion, learn it. She definitely benefits from that. But what Riot have stated is they believe that she is going to have a win rate which like declines as the enemy understands the champion and plays against more frequently. I believe Nico is someone who had a pretty like a fairly similar trend with like the ultimate and like making sure you're like utilizing knowledge of the passive and like the range on that. Aurora probably will follow suit. Well, I mean, that's what they say, and like that's what you'd want to believe. That could obviously differ, and I do think this champion's in a really good spot at the moment. Like, the ultimate is an incredibly powerful tool. She does have the tools currently to solo win games, especially if she's ahead of the curve. I'd argue that her early game damage can feel quite low if you're not able to consistently get in range to Q, but a lot of the matchups in the mid lane at the moment definitely going to find those angles. The other concern is obviously she can have like situations where she can be bursted down if she makes if she like poorly uses E and W, so you got to be careful in those situations. But I put her as like a low tier, as a low mid lane option, low A tier mid lane option at the moment, but can definitely rise up like once you put the games in. Definitely be rewarded for it. Cassiopeia and Asol are my other two A tier picks which are staying here for the moment. Both of them obviously benefit from, well, in Asol's case, he really benefits from like Blackfire Torch and Liandry. I believe Liandry has been his best option though for a bit. Right into Liandry, where you can utilize the slow and the damage. He's not so mana locked anymore, which was one of the problems of why you really valued those Lost Chapter items, and that was like why you went the old Liandry with the mana on it. Yeah, these days, not so much of a problem, but he can definitely still feel it if you're spamming out spells quite consistently, which is why you can obviously opt into it if you need it. But yeah, Rylai, Liandry, both these items really solid on him at the moment. Has incredible scaling, great wave clear, and yeah, pretty solid spot at the moment. Cassiopeia dropped down a bit with the changes she received, trying to like push away from being as mana gated. Obviously, she lost a lot of damage with the AP ratios being nerfed down a bit. With the, I believe it was the W, which lost like 15% or something, and the E, which lost 5%. Oh no, it was the Q, which lost 15%, and the E, which lost 5%. Yeah, it is pretty large amount of tag, considering E is kind of like an auto attack in the way for the champion. So she lost, yeah, a decent amount of power from that, and drops from like the S tier to my A tier now. Moving on to the S tier then. So I have Veigar. He's still here. I saw someone commenting previously talking about why Veigar is so high. Champion is incredibly good in low elo. That is like the main reasoning for it. He is a great low and mid elo champion where you are less likely to get punished. Obviously, when they pushed him towards those scaling AP ratios to get him out of the bot lane, it really hurts his high elo power, as it was obviously a large shift away from early game. And if you are someone who's like looking for like early, where you think like elite Veigar is, he definitely sits as more like a low B, C tier option at the moment. But yeah, for mid lane, for mid elo, low elo, definitely a solid S tier pick. Has options in like the rowers. I know people still tend to default on Luden's Companion, even though rower has been outperforming it for a while. But the champion does really value durability. Obviously values Rabadon's really aggressively because of the bonus AP he gets, and then values movement speed and yeah, durability, as I've already stated. But yeah, I believe this champion is a great S tier option at the moment. Heimerdinger also going to be my S tier. So Heimerdinger, I stated in the top lane video, but I'll say it here again. I think the champion's really underrated, really benefits from the current item system. Definitely slept on as a pick. People won't really understand how to play against your champion. He has really good siege potential with his turrets. He has great burst potential, and obviously if you can utilize these like factors combined with the itemization, this champion's in a great spot, and yeah, really deserving of an S tier place at the moment. Malzahar, primarily for his ease of play, if anything. This champion is very, very easy, and his point and click ultimate combined with his very simplistic wave clear can definitely really reward you in mid and low elo. You will get punished in high elo. This champion is telegraphed in what it wants to do, and people are more likely to itemize QSSs, play around your play around your ultimate CD. Not so long anymore. Obviously, it's like I believe it goes 140, 110, 70, I think, or the math, or 80. Anyway, I digress. This champion, yeah, still really easy to play. Great low and mid elo champion. Lux has great wave clear, great burst potential. You do feel it, obviously, if you fall behind. That is where this champion definitely struggles a lot more. But if you're able to stay ahead of the curve, and yeah, she's great burst potential. It can oftentimes like outright just win games for her team if she finds a pick onto the ADC, and maybe they're not running cleanse. Obviously, you're more likely to see Cleanse being a heavily taken summoner spell. The higher up you go, and like Barrier will be utilized more efficiently, heal, all the same. So yeah, Lux really benefits from like the enemy team, enemies not really dodging skill shots, whereas she can really thrive in low elo. Xerath is my favorite artillery champion. I think this pick is great within the current meta. He has so much range, he has great burst builds, he has great tools to deal with a lot of the champions. Obviously, if you're like in situations where you're jumped on by an assassin or enemy has a lot of dive, and the champion can really struggle if he's not playing far off the map. But if you're positioning yourself correctly, then yeah, you can do so much damage output, and he just outright has a lot of burst potential, which Xerath previously didn't really have as much access to, but the Q ratio, the W ratio, and flat damage combined with the builds can definitely really enable him to have that power, which he might not have once had as much access to. Set is an underrated pick. I see a lot of people talking about like his being short range, having relatively low base MR, but this pick really does shine within the mid lane at the moment. He is two different builds. He's like, I say two different builds. He's like two different rune options. It's like the PTM, the Conqueror variation, but the amount of sustain this pick has with like either Absorb Life, Second Wind, D Shield, just gives him like enough power to really resist a lot of mid laners combined with the W shield. This champion, yeah, has the tools to resist a lot of picks, and then he can outright win a lot of lanes once you have Stride Breaker, his map rotations combined with the just upright power he has as like an AD mid laner. If like you're pairing it alongside an AP mid laner, is really impressive. And yeah, the champion definitely slept on as like a top mid flex pick option, akin to like Garen, akin to like Quinn. Maybe not actually. Ignore the Quinn part. Quinn as like a standalone mid laner is amazing. Quinn in top, not so good at the moment. She probably falls down. I think I have her in the B tier or like a low A tier option. But in the mid lane, yeah, she is an incredible pick. The Symbiotic Souls were the only boots which didn't get nerfed, and she really benefited from that. Obviously, the way you play mid lane Quinn is very different to top lane Quinn. However, some people are kind of trying to like replicate it. The way you play mid lane Quinn is obviously the Profane Hydra combined with Symbiotic Souls, roam around the map, play with Electrocute, play on your burst potential, and that is very effective at the moment. And yeah, she is very deserving of an S tier spot. In Garen's case, he's a great top laner as well. Both Garen and Set, very strong top laners at the moment. In Garen's case, it's just the Stride Breaker, Phantom Dancer, Deadman's trio. However, you can opt into IE if you're looking for a bit more accessible damage. Sylas moves up from the A tier into the S tier. So no, I had him in the B tier. So interesting fact, Sylas was really underrated. Without the buffs going into 14.16, the health builds were really doing like a lot of work. I think I said he should be an A tier pick, but because people were still defaulting on like Lichbane burst builds, he doesn't quite make it there. Now that people have like moved over, combined with the fact that he got buffed this patch, he is a very good S tier champion. I do encourage people to play this pick if you really enjoy him at the moment. He's definitely like a top 3 to 5 AP mid laner at the moment. Obviously, very good in Elite still. This champion does tend to be a bit more Elite skewed compared to some of the easier to play AP options. Unlike an Annie, who is obviously a bit better within mid elo or mid and low elo, but she still has a level of conversion in her current state. She's a bit weaker than she has been in the past, but yeah, the champion's very simplistic. Tibbers, you can really easily build him to be quite effective within the game, whether it's like Rylai, Malignance, Leandry. You have loads of tools to make Tibbers really good. Obviously, you can also play into Annie's burst, and you can play around like a one-shot combo, whether that's with like Protobelt, Luden's Companion. There's build options there, and yeah, Annie in a great spot at the moment, a very solid S tier pick. Brand and Anivia. In fact, Anivia wasn't my A tier, but I'm actually going to move her up anyway. So Anivia is going to sit within the low end of my A tier. She's definitely benefiting from some of the AD mid laners being nerfed. She is great wave clear, great amounts of control over the game. Obviously, her Storm combined with Wall are very effective tools, and she definitely teeters between A and S tier at the moment. But I'm gonna leave her in the S tier, as I do think this champion definitely has a lot of value. She's pretty heavily misconcepted as being like this late game scaler, when she's definitely got a lot more power in laning phase. Some people kind of give her credit for, combined with like great mid game agency with the control she has. Definitely don't sleep on this pick. She is a very solid S tier champion. And I've actually seen a couple of Anivia supports recently, which is interesting. I don't know why I've seen so many Anivia supports, but fun fact there. In Brian's case, he is obviously a very mid and low elo skewed pick. He is easy to play. He has incredibly large amounts of damage over time, which can really attribute to like a great amount of like team fight wins. Obviously, he's being nerfed for jungle in 14.17, which might have a knock-on effect and lose him a bit of power in the mid lane, as he's kind of like a low tier S pick now, but he's been nerfed so many times, but he still thrives within the mid lane, and yeah, definitely deserving an S tier spot. I have 3 picks left. So Kennen sits as like a mid S tier option. His champion's great in his current state, also being nerfed in 14.17, but a very underrated mid laner, albeit very unpopular. He definitely benefited from Protobelt and Storm Surge being buffed, but Liandry has definitely been his like kind of hidden strong item, although people have kind of picked up and like it's being built more core now. Yeah, the item's great into like team comps where you can like sit back, harass with Q, whether that's because they're a bit more tanky or you're able to maintain uptime with Leandry's damage percentage buff. Obviously you can still go your burst builds, like Storm Surge is still a great option if you're looking for like one-shot combos and you can find those angles, but definitely consider Leandry if you maybe struggle a bit more with a champion, as it gives you a level of durability as well and can allow you to play a bit more safe into like a all-in combo. And then my 2 S tier picks, still Galio and Neferi. We finally saw Neferi in competitive, as we've seen Neferi and Galio in competitive now. We saw Galio mid and top. We saw Broken Blade play Galio top, I think, and we saw Frescawi play Galio mid, which I mean I'm really glad to see. For the average player, these champions have been incredible for a while now. In Neferi's case, I believe we saw someone in the LCK player. I think it was Nongxing's mid laner. I could be wrong there, but yeah, we did really well early on into the game with this pick, even though it is an incredibly aggressive late game scaler. This champion is like a stat stick assassin, which has been good for a while. I say good for a while. Good ever since they buffed it quite aggressively. And yeah, both these picks, very strong S plus mid laners at the moment. Galio obviously doesn't have the same level of carry agency as something like a Neferi, albeit you can opt into like burst builds with like your Protobelts, your Lich Banes, stuff like that, coming all quite nicely on him, but like you're primarily going the Hollow Radiance Riftmaker variation, which does give you a lot of upfront durability, and you still have a level of agency. You can definitely like find those map roam angles and be quite powerful. But yeah, Neferi, probably my recommended mid laner of the patch. He's an incredibly good AD mid lane option at the moment, pairs really well with AP junglers. Great stat stick, relatively easy to play. Yeah, very deserving of a high tier spot on my list. And those are my thoughts for the mid and low elo mid lane tier list. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.